Good morning, everyone. This is the Office of Consumer Credit Commissioners stakeholder meeting to discuss Pawnshop rule amendments implementing sunset legislation. My name is Matt Nance. I'm the OCCC's Deputy General Counsel. I'm joined by several members of the OCCC staff, including our Commissioner, Leslie Pettyjohn, Assistant General Counsel, Lori Hobbs, our Compliance Coordinator, Kimberly Billo, and our Director of Licensing, Moran Diamond. And now I'd like to turn things over to Commissioner Pettyjohn for a couple opening remarks.
Certainly. Thank you, Matt, and welcome to everybody on the webinar. And thank you to those of you who are here present in the room. I just want to welcome you to our meeting. We appreciate your participation in this process, participating in the stakeholder process and in evaluating the rules as we move forward, trying to implement sunset legislation is very important. Your participation is vital, so we very much appreciate that you are here and part of the process. In terms of news, some of you may have heard that the sunset bill was, the House approved the Senate amendments late yesterday afternoon. So we do finally have a bill that is on its way to the governor. And so we are grateful for the participation in the process of our sunset legislation and look forward to the next phase as we work to now implement what has been passed by the legislature. And I'm very grateful for the work of the staff and as we've moved through this process, and very grateful for Matt and his leadership on and Lori and her leadership on the rules process as we move ahead. And with that, I'll turn it back to Matt and to begin further talking about this rule action.
So like the Commissioner said, I want to thank everyone for coming. Stakeholder input is a really vital part of our rulemaking process, and these meetings help us ensure that we produce the best rules possible. At the side of the room, we have copies of our stakeholder meeting notice and the pre-comment draft of the rules. That has the draft rules we're going to be talking about today. A copy of the pre-comment draft is also available on the OCCC's webpage for recent and upcoming rules. We're holding the meeting on GoToWebinar. Some of you might be listening on your phones, some may be watching on computers, some may be doing both. For those of you watching on a computer, there's a window where you can submit questions. If you have technical questions about using the webinar, you can type those in and Kimberly will try to answer those. If you're listening online and have comments on the draft rules themselves, go ahead and type those in at any time, and I'll be getting to those as well. If you're on a computer with a mic, there's a function allowing you to raise your hand, and then we can let you make a comment verbally over the phone. For those of you here in person, we have a table with a mic where you can come up and share your comments if you'd like. If you have shorter comments or questions, you can share them from your seat, town hall style, although keep in mind if you do that, probably for our phone system to pick it up, I'll probably need to repeat the comment so that those listening online will be able to hear it. With that, I wanted to briefly lay out what's in the pre-comment draft, and then we'll turn it over to you to provide any comments. So these rules are based on the OCCC's sunset legislation. Sunset is a process that all Texas state agencies go through periodically, usually every 12 years. As part of the sunset process, the Texas Sunset Advisory Commission did a review of our agency. They made recommendations to the legislature about how to ensure we operate effectively, and then the legislature has passed a bill incorporating those recommendations. As the Commissioner said, as of yesterday, the House approved the Senate's amendment, so it's on its way for the governor's signature. Assuming the governor signs it, it will go into effect on September 1st, 2019. The Sunset Bill will amend provisions throughout the Finance Code, including Chapter 371, the Pawnshop Act. And there are four main pawnshop-related issues that the Sunset Bill addresses. And I can get this to advance the slide. So first, the bill amends the licensing requirement for pawnshop employees so that it will be optional. Starting September 1st, pawnshops will be able to decide whether they want to opt in to pawnshop employee licensing. If a pawnshop opts in, its employees will have to be licensed the same as under current law. If the pawnshop doesn't opt in, its employees won't have to be licensed, and those requirements won't apply to the pawn shop. The Sunset Commission had originally recommended removing pawn shop employee licensing altogether, but the legislature heard from pawn shop stakeholders who wanted to keep having their employees licensed because of the criminal history checks the OCCC performs. So the legislature wound up drafting the bill to maintain the pawn shop employee license program and make it optional. The second issue is that the bill authorizes the OCCC's oversight body, the Finance Commission, to set pawn shop employee license fee amounts. And this is consistent with the OCCC's status as a self-directed, semi-independent agency, where we try to set fees so that the fees for each industry fund the regulation of that industry. Third, the bill authorizes the Finance Commission to set license terms for periods up to 2 years. This is based on a sunset recommendation to make sure the agency has some flexibility to set license terms. And the sunset bill went into the various licensing and registration chapters we regulate and made similar changes to each of those. And fourth, the bill removes references to good moral character as a licensing standard. The Sunset Commission considered that to be too subjective a standard. But the Pawnshop Act will still include statements that the OCCC evaluates the character and general fitness of a license applicant. So the rule amendments we're initially proposing in this pre-comment draft address these 4 issues from the Sunset Bill. The rules would implement the Pawnshop Employee License Program by adding references and specifying that rules for pawnshop employees apply if the pawnshop has opted in to or participates in the Pawnshop Employee License Program. The rule at section 85306 would amend the pawnshop employee fees to $50 for a new license and $25 for a renewal to help ensure that the fees compensate the agency for the cost of the program. The rule at section 85104 would clarify license terms, renewal, and expiration. We'd really be maintaining the current system where those licenses have a 1-year term that expires on July 31st. And the amendments would remove the phrase good moral character from the licensing rules while explaining we still review an applicant's character and fitness, and that includes a review of criminal history. As far as the kind of our tentative or proposed timeline for these rules, today we're, of course, holding this meeting. We'll be accepting informal initial pre-comments on this draft until May 29th next week. On June 21st, the Finance Commission will have a meeting, and that's when we anticipate that we'll propose the rules for to the Finance Commission, and they'll vote on whether to publish them for official comment. During the month of July, there will be a period to send official comments on that proposed and published draft. We anticipate that on August 16th, at that Finance Commission meeting, we will present the rules for final adoption by the Finance Commission. On September 1st, the legislation, the Sunset Bill, will go into effect. And in mid-September, depending on when we're able to get the rules submitted back out to stakeholders, the rules will become effective, and any amended fee amounts for pawnshop employee license fees will go into effect. So that's the brief rundown summary of the content of the rules and the initial timeline. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to you to provide any comments you might have. We're particularly interested in any costs that licensees may experience if these amendments go into effect, and what you think about maintaining annual renewal and the current expiration date. Again, we have a table up here if you'd like to come up to speak, or if you make a comment from your seat, I'll be able to take that and repeat it for those listening to the webinar.
And Matt, if I may, I'd like to just clarify one issue, just to be sure everybody's on the same page. On the expiration date, it maintains the current expiration date of June 30th. So that retains that.
I'm sorry, yeah, June, I misspoke.
That's okay.
I'm sorry about that.
I'll just clarify.
Yeah.
But yes, we're ready to hear from from the public. We're ready to hear from the industry and anybody else that would like to comment on this set of rules proposed.
I have a question.
Sure.
Out of all of your regulated industries that you govern, are you keeping the annual licensing fees the same across the board, or?
Maureen, do you want to attempt?
The annual licensing fees for other industries, yes.
We go through a process evaluating the analysis of what the cost associated with every type of activity is. And there are from time to time, we apply various discounts associated with industries, and which we did in the pawn industry last year, a pretty significant discount, I believe, in the last year. But we'll go through the annual analysis to be sure. So a particular group might move, their discount might be less or might be more based upon what some of those anticipated costs might be and the revenue requirements. But generally, we've set a max. We set a max of all those fees Finance Commission did in 2009 or 2010, and those have not changed since that time. We don't anticipate moving those up beyond those maximums anytime soon.
Are any of the other industries that you're regulating going to a 2-year renewal as opposed to a 1-year?
So let me repeat the question. The question was whether any of the industries are going to a 2-year, and we've put out a pre-comment draft for the other industries. Currently, the proposal is to maintain 1 year for each of the industries, but we're interested in getting input from stakeholders. Would 2 years work better? Should 1 year be maintained? And those kinds of issues. So the current drafts maintain it for 1 year. We're interested in hearing from stakeholders about what they think.
We believe that 1 year works pretty well for us in the licensing area. Although we could probably talk about whether Pawnshop employee licenses might be, people would be interested in those being 2 years. But in our registration area, there might be opportunities to look at 2-year registration terms. It's discretionary. It's an option available to us, but we're not sensing right now a strong desire by a lot of folks to move that direction, but we're really open to comment on that. There's a couple of schools of thought we hear. Some people think it's less burdensome just to do it all at once. Others think it's more of a cash flow burden to pay for it all 2 years at once. So there's 2 schools of thought. We're very open to hearing about those concepts.
In the new rules, the Pawnshop says when it's applying for a license, they may provide a written notification to participate in the Pawnshop employee license program. Have you considered maybe just putting on the application process a checkbox?
We are considering some system changes as well as, some application changes to, start gathering that information for the opt-in, opt-out function.
I have a question on that. Is the opt-in program based on a store, or by store, or by company?
By master file or by, I'm
Can
sorry.
you please repeat? They're having a hard time hearing the questions from the audience, so either if you guys need to come to the microphone, or if you could repeat those questions.
If you'll just give me a chance to repeat it. So I guess some of the audio isn't getting to the listeners. So the initial question was, at the time of the application, will there be some sort of checkbox on the application? And
There will be.
Yeah, okay. So there will be a checkbox on the application.
And the second question was if this was company-wide or per store. And the answer to that question is it's company-wide or per master file, which are synonymous.
Kimberly, do we have any questions on the rules from the webinar? Okay.
As far as the licensing that we are getting ready to pay for, nothing's changing for this year. We're not even talking about this going into effect for any company until next year.
Okay, so the question was for if I understand it right, for the licenses being renewed this year, as in this June, the law won't be changing, and that's correct. The sunset bill wouldn't go into effect till September 1st. So until September 1st, the current law is going to be in effect, requiring renewal of licenses under current law.
Matt, were you talking about 75 days?
Yeah, there is a bit of a wrinkle there, which is that there's a 75-day period for new Pawnshop employees for the Pawnshop to ensure that license application gets filed for those Pawnshop employees. Now, what that means when you look at that together with the September 1st effective date is that I believe June 18th is 75 days before September 1st. So if you had a new Pawnshop employee starting before that day, in order to be in compliance through September 1st, you would need to get an application filed with us for that Pawnshop employee. If you have a Pawnshop employee, a new Pawnshop employee starting after that date, as in within 75 days of September 1st, and your Pawnshop doesn't intend to participate in the program, then you wouldn't need to file an application for that employee because you'd be in compliance within your 75 days up to September 1st, and then after September 1st, if you don't intend to opt in, you never would, and you wouldn't be subject to those requirements. So there's that little wrinkle. But again, just based on the text of the bill, its effective date, and ensuring compliance with current law up until September 1st.
And I just wanted to clarify something with regard to the company-wide implementation. So it would be sort of an all or nothing thing, like all employees for a certain master file would submit an application and require licensure, or none of them would. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and if a Pawnshop does opt in, we will expect, compliance as under current law. So getting those applications in, within 75 days, and ensuring that the employees stay licensed, providing us notifications of hiring and termination as described in the rules, maintaining records. So all those current requirements that apply to Pawnshops employing Pawnshop employees, if a Pawnshop does want to participate in this program, we require them to continue complying with all those requirements.
And I'll add in, one of the changes made by the Senate was sort of to help in the transition process to ensure that the licenses being renewed this June are effective for a whole year, and there's really no need to do, at some point the shop needs to opt in that wants to participate, and we'll have a way to do that on the system and other things, but nothing's interrupted for those employees that are licensed for the year. They continue all the way till the next renewal, and it should be seamless in that regard. And so we're grateful that last Senate amendment kind of helped ensure that it would be seamless. Otherwise, there was some potential disruption that might have happened before the end of the calendar year, but that new amendment takes care of that.
Going forward in 2020, will there be a resource available for consumers to determine what shops have opted in and have licensed employees versus those shops that have not opted in and do not have licensed employees?
The question was, will there be a resource for consumers to be able to see which Pawnshops have opted into the program and which have not?
That's an excellent question. It's not something we had yet considered, but I think it's something we can probably accommodate, and I think that's a great idea. I think we'll be happy to try to see how. There's some public search functions already on the website. Maureen, you may wish to speak to those.
Yeah, so we have the ability, in Alex, without logging in, you can do an advanced search in the top right corner to see details on a store or a master file, and we could talk about adding something there. where you could see if they've opted in or not. I also think that we could do something as we start to gather that information. We could post a list to our website too of those pawn shops who have opted in.
Is a pawnbroker who is denied a license public record?
Question was whether a pawnbroker who's been denied a license is public record. And yes, that it would generally be public information. Generally, most of our records and information are public information that can be requested by the public unless some specific exception applies. And just the fact that an applicant has been denied, there's nothing that makes that confidential, so it would be public information. Yeah.
That would also apply for withdrawn applications as well.
Yeah. Any other questions? So do we have any other webinar questions?
Or concerns, or just comments?
Yep.
Do you foresee any other rule changes coming out after this?
The question was about other rule changes coming after this. We don't currently have other pawn shop rules scheduled, so at this time we don't have any other scheduled.
There was something brought up at one of the previous meetings as far as who is liable. Currently, an employee is licensed, so if they do something really silly, then they're held liable, opposed to whoever owns the master file number. Is that liability still placed on the employee, or is it now placed on the owner? And was willful added back in to the statute?
Okay, so there were two questions. One was about are pawn shops liable for the acts of employees? And the second question was about a willful violation. So I wanted to address the first question about the responsibility of a pawn shop for acts of employees. So there's actually a current rule we have stating that pawn shops are responsible for the acts of employees. And we are not changing that rule in this rule action. The Sunset Bill reaffirms that concept and specifies that pawn shops are responsible for the acts of employees. But I think that was kind of intended to just reaffirm an existing concept from the rules, where our rules currently say that a pawn shop's responsible for acts of an employee, and we for violations could proceed against the pawn shop employee, or both. So that concept is in the current rules. It's reaffirmed in the Sunset Bill, and we are leaving that rule text alone in this particular rule action, so that would continue to be in the rules. Does that answer the question about responsibility of the pawn shop?
Maybe a follow-up question to that.
Okay.
Does an employee who is not licensed by the state have the same responsibilities as one who is licensed by the state in the eyes of the commissioner of what they may or may not do?
Okay, so the question was, does a pawn shop employee who's not licensed have the same responsibilities as a pawn shop employee who is licensed? And I think the answer is that they don't have the same responsibilities and legal requirements, just because if the pawn shop's not opted in, then the employee isn't responsible for maintaining a license. And our rules about actions we can take against pawn shop employees, if this rule goes into effect, we'd be specifying that those are limited to pawn shop employees of companies that are participating. So if you're if you're employed by a company that's participating, then, you'd have the same responsibilities that you have under current law. So does that kind of answer that question?
It answers it, yeah.
Okay.
Very good way.
I wanted to add that one of the ideas that we're exploring as well is whether or not we can provide perhaps some additional training opportunities for licensed employees that I think might be a real benefit to those licensed employees into the industry. So we are exploring that opportunity.
Okay.
Was willful added factor?
Yeah. So, right, the initial filed version of the Sunset Bill would have amended an administrative penalty provision to remove the phrase knowing and willful, and that amendment came out of the final bill that got passed. So currently, the agency can assess a penalty, or once the Sunset Bill goes into effect, the agency would be able to assess an administrative penalty if, a regulated person commits a knowing and willful violation, or if they violate an injunction issued by the agency. And then there are certain other scattered sections that let us assess an administrative penalty. But yeah, that knowing and willful is going to remain in the statute once the Sunset Bill goes into effect. Other questions?
A little clarification here. So under 37303, we have that same standard.
Oh, okay.
But over here, we have a knowing that's a reckless.
Yeah, there is, the commissioner's also pointing out there's a specific administrative penalty provision for pawn shops, section 371-303, that the commissioner may assess an administrative penalty against a person who violates this chapter. And I don't believe the Sunset Bill changed that. So, yeah. So that's going to, again, continue. The administrative, I guess the bottom line is that those administrative penalty provisions are going to continue as they currently are.
And does that by default mean that the commissioner could levy an administrative penalty against an unlicensed employee of a pawn shop?
So the question was, does that mean the commissioner could assess an administrative penalty against an unlicensed employee of a pawn shop? So typically what we're going to try to do, and again, the employee is only required to be licensed if the pawn shop's opted in. So if the pawn shop hasn't opted in, we wouldn't be proceeding against the pawn shop or a pawn shop employee for any kind of unlicensed activity. Assuming that the pawn shop has opted in and they have pawn shop employees that aren't licensed, what we would generally do is kind of escalating sanctions. We would try to start with an injunction generally to send that out to the pawn shop and the pawn shop employee, ordering them, notifying them of the violation, and if those violations continue in the future, to then escalate to an administrative penalty.
I would say we are very strongly going to look to the pawn shop itself for responsibility, but we're not precluded from assessing something against the employee. But in those cases, we're very strongly going to look to the pawn shop, because a pawn shop that chooses not to license employees is taking on the full all pawn shops should take on full management, but they're taking on a higher degree of responsibility of ensuring that compliance. and we're going to be looking for that.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? I've been told it's good to like wait 30 seconds or so just to be sure, just in case anything pops into anyone's mind.
When something comes up, we have a week to
Absolutely.
get those questions.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the process still is met. You want to go back to the timeline chart?
Yeah.
There's still other time too, even if it goes beyond the week. We've got official comment periods and all those kind of things potentially ahead. So.
Yeah, if you can submit things by May 29th, that'll enable us to, you know, take a look at what we've got on that date and make sure that what we present to the Finance Commission is kind of has an informed basis and kind of can take into account what we get from you guys before that. We always like to try to address concerns earlier rather than later. So yeah, if we can present something to the Finance Commission in June that addresses people's concerns, that'll be a lot better than trying to wait till the last minute in August.
One other question on the employee licensing. So if a company decides to opt out, would those employees all still have to sign the acceptance of goods? So that would all,
That's all remains.
whether they're licensed or not licensed, that would still maintain.
So the question was, if the pawnshop opts out, and you wouldn't really opt out, you would just never opt in. I got it. So if the pawnshop never opts in, do the employees still have to sign an acceptance of goods policy? And again, our current draft doesn't change that rule. So under this draft, we would not be changing the acceptance of goods rule, requiring pawnshop employees to sign that. And the pawn ticket too, I think, has a space where you like have a way to identify the employee. And again, we're not changing the form of the pawn ticket currently, but I understand that pawn shops have ways to identify employees by like initials or a number or something. So yeah, again, similarly to acceptance of goods, we're not currently changing, or we're not currently proposing any changes to the form of the pawn ticket. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you everyone again. So, like I've said before, rule updates are available on our website, and we will be posting the audio of this meeting. We're accepting written informal pre-comments on this draft until 5 p.m. on May 29th. Please email those to Lori at rule.comments@occc.texas.gov, which is our email address for rule comments. This afternoon, we will be having another stakeholder meeting about our other licensing and registration rules for other industries, as well as complaints. If you're interested in any of those issues, feel free to join us for that meeting as well. And with that, I think we're done, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you all.